I worked on the My Futures project team, so the work stream that sets up the webinars and the resources you've seen in the My Futures portal for starting a business and joining a startup. So I've coordinated the panel of experts you'll meet today. They're fantastic. The intent is to keep this very laid back, enjoy yourself. The panel members will spend about roughly 5 minutes introducing themselves and explain some of the key steps they think are important to consider when joining a startup. Please keep in mind that the ideas and steps, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's somewhere to start, and it's coming from the mouths of people that have experienced this, that have worked with BP folks and understand kind of what you're going through. After we've presented the 5 key steps, we'll open it up for Q&A. And then you can also type questions into the chat, and I'll monitor that as well and see how we get along. Anything we can't get to, I'll try to put all the Q&A in a document if there's a lot of them and we're running out of time, and then disperse it later. So any questions about how we're going to run it? No? Okay. Let's kick it off with, I'll hand it over to Ruth, who's going to start out with our step 1.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Ruth Penfold, and I am the People Practice Lead for Launchpad, who are BP's new business accelerator, who I'm sure people will have heard of. But my background is very much in startups. So actually, my first 13 years, I was a headhunter, but those were in tiny recruitment businesses where we were quite literally flying by the seats of our pants. And then I spent 5 years with Shazam, who many people will have heard of. And we then sold that business to Apple. And then I spent almost 2 years with another machine learning startup, founder-led this time, called Onfido, who are an identity verification business. They've gone on to do very well. They just had 100 million investment this year. So I've run the whole gambit of different size of startup and different levels of popularity too, probably. But I think I'll speak a little bit more about my startup experience in a minute. But I think the thing that's really important for a human is to feel like they are living and moving in a purposeful way. And the closer we can get to that, that's where we really start to experience a joyful experience in our lives. So I think if you're not doing so already, change when it comes is a really great opportunity to reflect and to start to look for the markers within yourself that might already be signifying areas of interest or things that you might be maybe wanting to explore a bit more. So I think really, I put it like, I actually stole listening to The Whisper of Curiosity from my friend Andy Iam. He's written a brilliant blog on it, but I think it's important to kind of reflect and ask yourself how much of you right now, or of you at work, is really you. Now, maybe you're one of the fortunate people who've managed to start to allow a bit more of yourself, your whole self, to come to work, perhaps. For me, that only really happened when I started working in startup technology businesses, because suddenly I was amongst the people who'd been a bit different at school and doing different things, and so it was like I kind of found my spiritual home. So I gave myself permission then to bring my whole self to work. But I think the question that I also have asked myself at one time is how much is really of you is really defined by you or defined by others. And up until this point, have you made the choices that you've wanted to along your career path, or actually have you just kind of gone along with things? Now, it's not always a bad thing to go along with things. Water flows through the path of least resistance. But I accidentally fell into recruitment, and then I ended up falling in love with people. And my purpose is I get to help build organizations where we can create environments where people can thrive, and I help people to learn about themselves. So I accidentally ended up doing something that really lights me up. But it was just a series of fortunate events, right? It wasn't necessarily a deliberate path. So You can also be thinking about setting goals based on where you really want to be, but it does take courage to step away from other people's expectations of you. And whether you've chosen the situation that you're in right now or not, it takes courage to take the next steps that you're taking, and to take a moment to kind of tap into your inner wisdom. So we spend most of our lives living from our brains, right? And we actually think we're brains. Well, plot reveal, newsflash, we're not. Our brains are just an organ in our body that are there to keep us safe. The real you is a very deep, wise person that sits within you, that probably sits there laughing at your brain most of the time as it dances around and worries about things and overcomplicates situations and won't let things go. So see whether you can find a way in your life to tap into that inner wisdom. For me, the tool that was most effective for me to do that was meditation, but one size does not fit all. There's many different ways that you can do so. Frankly, just slowing down and being still often is the thing. But if you're like me and you have an overreactive brain, it might be that you need to find a way to turn this off so that you can actually start to listen to everything else. The other thing that I would just say is pay attention to your emotions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Jealousy, I know people don't like to talk about it, but actually I use jealousy as a marker for my truth. Because if I feel slightly jealous of what someone's doing, jealousy actually can be defined as self-fury. So if you feel slightly jealous, you don't have to tell me, you can just tell yourself and be honest about it. If you feel slightly jealous about someone, then what is it about that person? What is it that they're doing that maybe you wish you were doing? And you can use that as a sort of like trail of breadcrumbs to start to figure out what you're into and what you like. So really start to track your emotions in that way. But I mean, I spent a long time trying to fit into what I thought the rest of the world wanted me to be. But as I was saying, for me, working in a startup was tremendous fun because it felt like I came home. You're surrounded by creativity. Technology businesses are some of the most creative places that you could ever be. Obviously, not all startups are tech. I get that, but this is just where I was. So I was surrounded and I was captivated by that energy. Also, if you're in an early stage business, it's massively exciting, but it's also massively terrifying at the same time, particularly if it's your own thing, right? You don't quite know what's coming next. And you have to be kind of really versatile and good at fixing stuff generally in early stage businesses. So I get that that's not for everyone. And I've worked in businesses at different stages, so I've kind of seen all elements of that. But if startups are the right place for you and you like the idea of being challenged all the time and perhaps maybe using the opportunity to take yourself in slightly different directions, then it could turn out to be tremendous fun. So I'm going to pop some questions in the chat for you to take away so that you can start to, these are just some questions for you to go away and reflect on to help you start to figure out what your markers are for the things that maybe you're most interested in, for what your values are, maybe even what makes you feel most purposeful, and what you're good at. So I'll pop them into the chat. And I'll stop talking now and I'll pass back to Angela.
Thank you, Ruth. And I think, it's so timely, I think, with everything going on in the world and lockdown. And everybody's situation is different, obviously, but I feel like the way the world's turned upside down, like everything's up for grabs. There are kind of no hard and fast rules anymore, and these boxes we have to fit in and, kind of use the time to go, maybe I could, fit into a different box, or that's not who I always were, who I was, or yeah. So I think it's timely to think about that things and really what lights you up and start off in the way the world is now, because it's completely different. I'll hand over to Heath next. He's going to talk about building your tribe.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I guess one of the main things you need to do in a startup when you are joining it or when you're building it yourself is to build a team around you. It's a lot more, I guess, dynamic than it is in a situation where you have a preset team. So depending on the stage of the startup, you are going to need to, I guess, build a lot more than what you were used to. So you're not going to be dropped into a ready-made team. So for instance, if you are joining a group of people who are, two founders and a dog, you are going to need to essentially be a whole lot of roles that you've not realized that you need to be. So you're going to need to have support in the form of contractors. You're going to need to have support in, for lack of a better word, acolytes, people who you know who are going to be, very interested in the direction that this business is taking. A little bit later stage startup, after the startup has either made some money or has received some investment, you're going to have to learn how to, see the qualities in a, in a team that, essentially fit holes in your own skill set, which a lot of people aren't necessarily geared towards realizing what the holes in their skill set are or what is complementary to themselves or the startup. So trying to think of different ways that you can essentially essentially realize what your shortcomings are, acknowledge them in a way that is essentially makes it a proactive, problem solving skill that you have to kind of figure out, rather than something that you either have to hide or study up on yourself. Because when you're in a very, very early stage startup, you don't really have time to, learn to code or learn to do, specific things with marketing, or do, learn how to do CRM things competently, or how to negotiate contracts competently. So in the early stages, especially, you need to figure out who can we afford and who do I know in my network that can help the startup, either achieve those goals, or someone who can train me up fairly well. As you go into the later stages, you will probably be asked, especially if you've been there for a while, or if it's a very small team, you will be asked to, hire people on your team. So you're going to need somebody with Ruth's skill set either to help you or to get advice from, or you're going to need to have, a Rolodex of friends that you can, go to and say, hey, how do I build this team? How do I help a startup get to the next stage? And it's very easy to be distracted, I guess, by the day-to-day fires of a startup that serve to not really get you looking towards the long-term goals of how that company is going to be successful. So taking the time to acknowledge that you need to build your tribe and need to build a team is very important. I'd say the other thing about building a tribe that you have to think about, just from the lens of the startup, is the startup's tribe. So in the very early stages, you have a very, I guess, disparate and not very engaged group of potential customers or potential partners that you're going to need to engage with. So, if you are looking at something in a sector that you're not used to, like outside of the energy sector, you're going to need to learn how that tribe of people interacts, how the people in the tech sector interact, or how the people, in whatever sector you are, glomming onto, essentially, like to interact, like to receive their information, what trade shows they go to, what media they consume, how they make purchasing decisions, that sort of thing. And acknowledging that the motivations of these new stakeholders are different than what you're used to in BP is incredibly important. So again, going into the situation from the perspective of, acknowledging that you don't know, and that that's okay, and taking time to figure out exactly what you don't know is going to save you a lot of time in the long run. Angela, I didn't know if you wanted to cover off anything specific, or if I should pass it to the next panelist.
Oh, that's great. I think a lot of what I've learned just from talking to all of you is getting and being part of a new community outside of yourself. And, doing this can be quite isolating and lonely. And it's just understanding how to get into the right places and the right rooms and have the conversations and build that community around you. And I think a good place to start is the BP alumni page that we've set up, because there may be other people. I mean, talk to everybody in this group. It could be that you start there and say, hey, we're all trying to figure this out and navigate together. What are you doing? What are you doing? And maybe you can buddy up, or so you don't feel so isolated, and maybe accountability partners. I don't know if that would help too, but I think all that, Heath, it's good message. Well, we'll hand it over. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's all I had. I think I wanted to point out the factor of loneliness, and don't fall down because you can't seem to find or connect or understand how to connect outside of BP.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very important aspect. It's a little, if you join a very early stage startup, it's a little like being in a pandemic, strangely enough.
Yeah.
So when I was working in my startup, I worked for essentially 3 years in a room. I had a team in India, I had a CTO that I engaged with part-time, and I had a couple of other folks that were giving help here and there in the initial year and a half. And it's incredibly lonely and isolating if you don't take the time to, engage with the community in different ways through meetups or through trade shows or through gatherings that you can get access to. It does feel like you are just Sisyphus all by yourself, pushing the rock up the hill. So it is very important to find ways to engage with both the startup community, but also with your broader community, so that it's not the laser beam focus that a lot of people applaud, but that drives humans crazy after a while.
I think the good news is if you've been with BP long enough, you know that like networking is everything. So we've pretty much probably got that skill set down of just pinging people for a coffee chat, or I get to know you, or yeah. So I'll move on to Bob, who's going to cover the concept of testing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so hello everybody. I'm Bob Flint. I work in digital science in BP. I joined about 6 years ago. And actually, before I joined BP, I guess I'd had a kind of dumbbell career. I'd worked either in big companies or in teeny tiny ones. So when I was reflecting on what might be useful for this webinar, I was thinking on my own experience. So joining a couple of teams at the founder level. So really when the company was super young and was really thinking about what ideas it wanted to pursue. So a very fluid stage of its existence. So I've done that in 2 very small organizations, but also in a larger one where I joined as probably employee number 20. And that company was already in quite a different place. So it had it was a technology-based business, and it was really looking at how it could build that out and it had found product market fit, and it was really looking at how it could scale. And that's now got to a unicorn status. So, startup covers lots of different parts of the growth cycle. And then I was reflecting, well, what does testing mean in this context? We actually had another webinar about a month ago where we were talking about testing in the context of creating your own company and then testing out the proposition of that company. I think here it means something slightly different, and it's probably something around, what's the right kind of startup for you, and what are the dimensions of that? Something about the chemistry of you and the other people in the organization. This is going to be a smaller organization and therefore a smaller space, so chemistry is really important. And then something about what seat you want to fill. So what role do you want to perform in that organization? So that idea of testing, the right answer is down to you, but I just wanted to suggest some alternatives and some dimensions to test out. So what kind of startup might be right? Well, of course, there is really early stage stuff, as I've mentioned. So do you want to get involved when everything is clay and everything is moldable? Is that where you want to put your mark on something? Or would you be happier in an organization where maybe a lot of things have been ironed out, and really this is all about building it out, scaling, deploying, and perhaps there's a bit more certainty. Also, is it in a brand new area? Are you looking to stretch yourself, maybe develop, try something entirely new? Or are you looking to maybe make the transition from a BP role to a startup easier? So looking to bridge to something which is going to make use of your existing skill set, even really what you're doing in the current organization. Are you looking for something which is high risk, high reward? Is this something where, depending on what stage of your career you're at, you're just looking to try something out, and where the outcome is that that maybe you're looking for financial reward, but you're happy to sustain quite a lot of risk on the journey, or are you looking for something that's got some more certainty? And then I guess the other dimension would be something around work-life balance. You know, you've hopefully had a good experience at BP, but you might be looking to change things up. So are you going to mix in your startup experience with some re-education or more family time? So that's entirely down to you, but all of these represent points of reflection. On the chemistry point, definitely my startup experiences have been about finding organizations where I've had purpose. But I think the kind of people that you meet are super important, and they're going to really determine the success of the venture, but also how much fun you're going to have, frankly. So I think that is really, really important, that you find people that you're comfortable with. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all like you, of course. So reflecting on your insights profile, being really honest with yourself about your own needs and wants, you know, what's going to make you fulfilled in a role, and what do you not like in terms of working with others. That's really important, you know, having an honest conversation with yourself first. So for example, you know, in many startup environments, having an unstructured environment is quite common. And I think, as Heath mentioned, you may be required to wear lots of hats. So are you happy with that? Or would you prefer something maybe at a later stage when you're going to be doing something as part of a better defined process? And then I think the filling the right seat point is understanding what capabilities you can bring, first of all. I think BP is a fantastic training ground. So reflecting not just on your knowledge and what subject matter expertise you have, but also these great capabilities that you're going to bring around data-driven decision making, about managing, motivating and energizing people, about bringing structure and process to things. These are all really great properties to bring to a startup. So although they might feel to be things that are just about big companies, I think there's huge amounts of complementarity to bring to a small organization to help them be efficient and consistent. So I guess the process to go through, you know, something about taking a period of reflection, a bit of time, decompressing, spending time with family, but also thinking about what motivates you, what you're good at, and what you want to have around you. Networking, super important. We've talked about that a lot. I think my last experience of this, when I came out of a big company, I spent about 6 months just talking to people before I really committed. And I spoke to lots of different organizations and lots of different entrepreneurs before I really understood what they were looking for. And I found a fit with me and the kind of company and the kind of people they were. And then spending time with the team. So, I mean, these days, spending time with them socially is quite hard, but really as much time as you can afford and they can give you to really understand them and then feel comfortable, as comfortable as you can do. And don't forget, you know, there's no one-way tickets to anything. So if things don't work out, then fine. Lots of startups don't make the distance. Lots of these kinds of roles are going to be experimental. So suck it and see, be agile, go for it. Back to you, Angela.
Thanks, Bob. I think I always joke with people, it's kind of, you know, it sounds a little bit like dating. If you go in, you go, do we share the same values, or do I feel comfortable around you? Are we all heading in the right direction? And it's kind of like how we pick our suppliers at BP. I always use the joke that it's kind of like dating. And if the foundational bits are there that you can operate within, then you just know it feels right. We're going to kick it over to Daniela to talk about risk.
So it's going to be a joint session. So Heath and myself are going to talk about risk. So let me start with a brief introduction. So I'm a biochemist by training, and I did my PhD thesis in Munich and was working, and apologies if it's getting too scientific, was working on a combinatorial process to identify RNA aptamers out of a pool of 10 to the power of 16 different molecules with excellent binding behaviors. And those RNA aptamers can be used as therapeutics, diagnostics, molecular tools, and as vaccines, which is quite popular these days. And while we were doing this, we saw, wow, we got a lot of traction from the industry, and I thought, why shouldn't we commercialize it? And we came up with the idea to start a company. We filed patents. We worked on our first business plan. We asked colleagues if they are interested to join the company. And since no one was really keen to take over the financial part, I volunteered and became the CFO of the company. And initially it was more learning by doing, and then the board and we decided that it makes sense to study economics as well. And it was quite painful to do everything in parallel, to just build a startup, to study economics. But in the end, I would say it was worth it to do so, because it gave us a base to raise money. And we've been able to raise 16 million from venture capital. We all were PhD students, so we had really no penny in our pocket. So we needed outside money, and we built a team of 35 people. And we've been able to accelerate the process we did in our PhD thesis, and took us 1 to 2 years, and we accelerated to do the same process in 3 days. And we brought it on a robotics platform, which was quite exciting, and it was a big milestone, actually. And we eventually listed a company, and I left the startup. So I did it the other way around. I left the startup and got hired by a big corporation. I got hired by BASF, did global key account management and venture capital, M&A, and 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I joined BP Ventures, and I'm based out of San Francisco. So I've basically seen two words. And if we talk about risk, I mean, we've heard this from the first panelist, joining an early stage startup certainly bears a lot of risk, and because the startup, if they don't have a product or they haven't commercialized the technology, have no revenues, are unprofitable, startups have a different risk profile in terms of financial stability. And if we talk about an advanced startup, then we see companies with a commercially proven product, and it's a complete different risk profile. And it's certainly what kind of startup you would like to join, and I would recommend to do real diligence, not only on the team, also on the technology and the products, to get a better sense what risk stage the company is. But I would say if it's a more of an advanced stage and the product is already proven, the company raised a sufficient amount of money and is financed through a couple of years, and it's actually, I mean, from a risk perspective, it's actually quite solid. But I would like to hand it over to Heath. So.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Yeah, I agree with Danielle. I think the stage is very important as to what we're talking about here for the main risks. So in the very early stages, I'd say the outsized risk is in the people who you're coming in with. So if you're looking to say, co-found a company with somebody who you find through your network, or if you were looking to join a startup with just 3 or 4 people, you are going to be very dependent on those people having a good personality, who can roll with punches, who are competent without being arrogant, who are willing to listen to different strategic directions if you have a hope that the startup will progress to the next level. I think, having a compelling product and having a compelling, customer base is incredibly important, but you are going to be engaging with this very small group of people an enormous amount of time. And I think when I've seen startups fail, and I didn't really give a background on myself initially, I've worked with probably, 200 to 300 startups over time, and I've run my own, and I've done some direct consulting in a very focused way with some others. The most often a situation goes bad is when a founding team hasn't decided, who is in charge, hasn't gotten together to understand what the main goals are, how we're going to interact as a group, who is going to be, leading this ship versus who is going to be doing support roles. It's something in the early stages you really have to look out for is the sort of nebulous goals, or somebody who has a bit of a personality quirk. Again, going back to what Angela was saying, it's a bit like dating. If you think, oh, this is a bit annoying, even more so than in your normal business, corporate engagements, someone with a personality quirk, or someone who is very fussy, or someone who is basically sending up your radar a little bit, really don't ignore it with an early stage startup, I'd say. So it's very much outsized people risks in the very early stages. And Daniela, did you want to talk about later stage a bit? I think we had mentioned that. I can talk about later stage too as well. So anyway, then Daniela, it looks like you're having trouble coming off mute. Let me know if you want to take over. But yeah, in the later stages, you look a little bit more towards structure and fundraising, and how the company is going to get to cash flow break even. So asking questions like, how are you guys, splitting your equity with employees? How are you thinking of funding this through to a place where you have a certain, critical number of customers? Who are your potential investors? How are we going to be raising money from them? What key inflection points do we need to achieve in order to get to a point where we are investable, or where we are going to be cash flow break even, so that you can make sure that you are, have the best chance of being successful. A lot of startups run out of fuel, and it's usually because folks who are at the top are not thinking about how the company is going to be funded through the lean times, how they're going to be funded to a point where they have a good enough product or a solid enough story where they can, get a critical mass of business, or a critical number of investors to fund them through to the end. I'm looking at the chat here. Did we want to address these, Angela or Daniela? Did you have anything to add to what I said?
No, thank you. No, in terms of early startup versus advanced startup, it's really the risk profile in terms of financing. An advanced startup, like I mentioned in the very beginning, they already have a product on the market. They have customers. They have revenues. They're not necessarily profitable, whereas an early stage startup really kind of in a lab stage, needs to raise money, has a lot of ideas. So it's really depending on your risk appetite. If you would want to join a more early startup with less financial resources, with a product pipeline which isn't proven by the market, or a more advanced startup which is either well financed or really has a product which is already launched and with already revenues and customers. So it's depending on your risk appetite.
We can, I
Yeah.
know there's some questions in the chat, but we can open it up now if you want to come off mute and folks want to come and direct a question to any of our panelists, or if you feel comfortable. Let's see. I'll look at the chat real quick.
I had a question. So as I've been networking around, a few people have said that companies feel very different at very small numbers, even going from 4 people to 10 people to 50 people. Does anyone have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone on a podcast this morning about this very thing, and they do feel very different. And then it's quite interesting. You watch a company go through those stages of development. So initially, obviously, you've got your founder, who is really the like the Energizer Bunny, right? Who this somebody who believes in this thing against all odds. And by the way, to be a founder, you don't have to believe in the thing against all odds, but you need to be able to convince people that you do so that people get on your bus. And the first people that get on your bus will have a tremendous amount of access to you as a founder. And that's wonderful in the beginning, because you've got this incredible feeling of connectedness, and you really do like. This is the time when people are like, I don't care, I'll be at the office all night, without all the martyrdom of, oh my goodness, I was working till 8 p.m. You know, they're like, let's get pizza, let's figure this out, right? It's this beautiful energy that is created amongst human beings when they work in a close team like this. Actually, fun fact, when human beings work that closely together, on a very human organism level, we actually align to one another to the point that our heartbeats can actually align. Not that we might know it, but that's how deep it is. So it's an incredible feeling. And then as the business scales, what happens is, you know, the founder is trying to do too many things usually, so then needs to hire in subject matter experts, or just people that are good at the stuff that they're not so good at. So they then hire in those people, and then those early people probably have less access to them, because maybe those early people haven't been able to grow in the hockey stick curve type manner that they need to be able to scale with a rapidly scaling business. So when they lose access to the founder, their experience changes. And that's the point where a company has to work very hard to codify its culture, so that it can then really try to keep some energy of that early energy. And they try really hard. On Fido, the company I worked with before Launchpad, actually did a really good job of that. But the founders were having to scale in that hockey stick curve like way, which they did for sort of 7 or 8 years. Actually, just this year, both founders that were still in the C-suite have actually stepped away just this year, but that company has scaled massively in that time. So yeah, it's a very different kettle of fish. And then what you'll find is that the early people often will go, you know what, this isn't for me now. I like to be somewhere where it's smaller, where I'm in that energy. But once somebody's actually had that experience of that early stage team where everyone's coming together like that, it's like, it's like falling in love in a way, because you then look for that energy again. And it's really hard to, you're lucky if you have that kind of a team level experience at least once, because you can't manufacture it. It's the magic of startup.
Yeah, thanks. It sounds really cool. Yeah, I was being told that when you go from like 5 to 10 people, that your understanding of information available. So if it's a very small company, you know everything that's happening. So as soon as it hits 6, then it changes, and then 10, you might get politics, and then it kind of ramps up.
There is always politics.
It's always politics.
That's it. They're always, and actually, sorry, go on, Heath.
No, I was just saying, one of the reasons why I said who is the leader. So in the early stages, the politics are, who is in control. So with co-founders, there is often this, oh, we're 50-50. Well, that's great until you guys disagree and you can't move forward until one or the other of you, breaks essentially. So, having very clear, even early on, very clear lines of, okay, I am the CTO versus the CEO. I acknowledge that the strategy of where the company is going is, you know, is this other person, she's going to have the final word. So I'd say the politics are different, but yeah, there's absolutely a point where you will not know what other departments are doing, and you will not be able to intelligently articulate that. But yeah, I think if you were looking for a place where politics is less of a factor, it's not necessarily less politics in startups. It's very different politics. There's less bureaucracy, definitely.
Yeah.
But still, politics unfortunately plays a big role, which is why I said finding people who you like and who you can interact with and who aren't precious and who can be dynamic is so key.
Yeah. I mean, the scope of responsibility is completely different in a small startup with 4 founders or so. I mean, you're gonna be responsible for tons of things, much broader than well, in a very kind of particular position in a big company. So, and from this perspective, it makes a lot of sense to get to know the founders very well from the very beginning, because you got to spend a lot of time with them, and you have to wear several hats. And as the company grows, it's kind of getting in a bit of a different direction. I wouldn't say it's a lot of politics, but it's your scope of responsibility is changing.
Thank you.
We do have a question in the chat. Any tips on early stage funding and how you manage the living costs until you move longer term funding?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So unfortunately, my version of this might not work for everybody. So when I was starting my company, I worked out of a bedroom of somebody else's house in a very bad part of town. That's how I kept my costs under control, because I live in the Bay Area, and you can't really make your dollar or pound stretch very far here. I think the other things to think of is, you know, again, kind of going back to what I said earlier, is how close is this company to funding? You know, if you see a very clear pathway to where you could get investment here, like Daniela was saying, you have customer traction early on, or you are going to be addressing a very large market that is easy to articulate, or there's, you know, if you are doing sort of an impact startup where you are looking to do a social good, is there a ready group of people who are ready to fund you? That's key. But yeah, understanding how long it's going to be potentially until the startup gets money is very key, just to understand how you can budget. In terms of other things that you can do, Kickstarter campaigns is something that some very early startups do. You can get money from, unfortunately, what's termed the 3 Fs, friends, family, and fools. Basically, people who are very passionate about you and who believe in you and what you are doing is very important in the early stages. But yeah, in terms of other cost-cutting things, finding other people who are passionate, who are willing to dedicate their time so that you can move faster, dedicate their time for either little equity or no equity is very important. So I had people who, I was doing a healthcare startup that was addressing overcharging in medical billing. So I was able to rely on people who were just passionate about doing something about the US medical billing industry and what they were doing to consumers. So finding people who are passionate about, you know, whatever goal you have as the startup can help you save costs. But you know, without knowing your personal financing situation,
no, thanks. Good tips. I don't think my daughters will be up for the kind of move to a bad part of town and working from the bedroom. But yeah, yeah.
Well, but there are actually some financing vehicles, governmental financing opportunities, accelerators, and those could be interesting in a very early stage of a company. I mean, it's a seed financing. I'm talking about the European Investment Bank is launching a new program for early stage startups. So there are sources to get money if you would like to found a company, even in the very early stage. Or another source is certainly from friends and family, what he's mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's in the UK, if you're talking about the UK, there are lots of grant networks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bureaucratic, quite often a process of trying to understand what the grant funder wants to do and then pressing the buttons that unlock the funding. So it's not always easy, but then it's effectively free money, right? So you're not diluting.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other point I was going to make was you may not necessarily need funding, right? So there are plenty of businesses which can self-fund because they can be revenue generating from an early stage. So if you're looking at scaling a services business, for example, you know, what's your minimum viable product that you need to generate some revenues? It may not be your ultimate scalable service, but it might be something that brings in enough cash that you can then simultaneously build the bigger company alongside it. So, you know, funding can be dilutive, and doing it early can be very dilutive. So you may want to think twice before doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? No? Okay. Then we will bring this to a close, and there'll be a post-event survey coming your way. So we welcome your feedback just to inform future sessions in 2021 in the My Futures portal. But thank you for registering and attending, and I hope you found it helpful. And thank you so much to our panel of experts. I know this is way above and beyond your day job, and just really, really grateful for your insights and your help in putting this together. So
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.